So our first episode is a mining disaster which took place in Sullivan, Indiana in February of 1925. One of the things you've got to realize is just how common mining disasters were in the early 20th century. Between 1901 and 1925, there were 367 mine explosions, mine disasters, that killed at least 5 people. From 2001 to 2025, there were 5. Gives you some indication of the progress that has been made with respect to industrial safety over the last 100 years. Also, when dealing with mine disasters, there are almost always explosions. And there's 2 different types of chemical reactions that are going to cause the explosion. One is going to be coal dust. That's a little rarer, but coal dust in and of itself is an explosive material. If it's in a sufficient concentration mixed with oxygen in a confined space and there's a source of ignition, you can have yourself an explosion. In this particular case, we think it was methane gas that caused the explosion. And methane gas, again, would require an ignition source, an enclosed space, and the concentration of methane has to be between 5 and 15% for it to be explosive. If it's more than that, it won't do anything. There won't be enough oxygen in the ratio to even lead to combustion. If it's less than that, it won't go off either. So it has to be the right combination of oxygen, methane in an enclosed space, and an ignition source. The ignition source, well, that's another thing. You wouldn't think that guys would be rolling around mines and methane gas with lighters and open flames, but they did. Before 1925, the most common way of a miner lighting his way was a headlamp, a lamp on his head, which would be powered by oil in the old days, could be powered by acetylene. By the mid-1920s, it's powered by carbide. Now, there are safety lamps available, but those safety lamps cost money and they haven't been adopted across the industry. The safety lamp, what it has is a fine mesh of steel. That fine mesh surrounding the flame, what it does is reduces the temperature of the waste gas in the burning process. So whereas it might come off the flame at say 800 degrees, by the time it goes through that mesh sucks heat out of it, and it may only be 250, 300 degrees as it goes into the atmosphere outside the lamp. That means it's below the ignition point of the methane or coal dust, and it renders basically everything safe. They're still trying to figure out that cost-benefit analysis. In the 1920s, mine owners are reluctant to invest in the equipment, but a few more things like this, and they eventually did. So what do we got here? February 20th, 1925, we have the Daily Republican from Rushville, Indiana, with the first newspaper account of the disaster. At least 1 killed and 30 others prisoners in Sullivan Mine. The fate of 50 trapped coalmen was in doubt here this afternoon as rescue teams worked feverishly to free the men who were imprisoned by a gas dust explosion in the city mine, 1 mile east of here at noon today. The early death count is 1. They think there were 30 other people in the mine. That would prove to be too low, too light. Second headline we find is Princeton Daily Clarion of February 20th, 1925. 2 dead, 3 hurt, taken from Sullivan Shaft. All rescue teams rush to scene of explosion, which wrecks mine interior and entraps men in northeast section. Is a further description. At 2:30 this afternoon, the work of rescuing the entrapped miners was proceeding slowly owing to the debris of the mine entry caused by the explosion. Men in charge of the rescue work reported that it was hardly probable that the approximately 50 men still in the mine had escaped injury or death. It was stated that it might be 2 or 3 hours before the men could be reached. Turns out it would be a lot longer than that. There were, in fact, 50 men trapped below ground. There were 125 men working in the mine on the date of the explosion. The rest were in other parts of were able to escape unharmed. The paper goes further in detail. Reports brought to the top by men engaged in seeking the dead and injured indicate that it's probable many others are dead. All mine rescue teams in the district have been rushed to the scene, and physicians and ambulances are held at the shaft mouth awaiting developments. Every doctor in Sullivan County was rushed to the scene. Cots were taken from Sullivan furniture stores. Rescue teams from around the state and Illinois were sent to the scene. Unfortunately, mine disasters were so common that there was a set rescue procedure, including the requisitioning of cots, that kicked into place immediately following the disaster. They were prepared It looks like they were prepared to treat the results of the disaster, but not that prepared in preventing such disasters. Headline, Indianapolis Times, 50 men entombed in Indiana mine. Approximately 50 miners were trapped early this afternoon. The mine was filled with gas and the fate of the imprisoned men is unknown. A rescue squad of 20 picked men equipped with gas masks has entered the workings in an effort to reach them. And it repeats, every available doctor in the county has been sent, cots have been requisitioned, and they're getting ready to deal with the mass casualties that are expected to flow from an incident such as this. One thing that you'll notice in the aftermath of the mine disaster is the tenaciousness with which the rescue teams go about their business and the degree to which they're willing to expose themselves to harm in order to rescue injured workers or bring up the bodies. Headline, rescuers seek tirelessly for miners in shaft. 18th victim brought to the surface after hours of labor. This is from the Indianapolis News. 18 bodies have been recovered, 33 either dead or missing, still in debris. 6 were far enough away from the death chamber that they may be alive. Explosion believed caused by ignition of gas from pocket. One of the things that happens following any disaster is the propensity to want to blame somebody for it, or also to take action, to seem that you're doing something. And it turns out that at this time, in early 1925, there was actually legislation in front of the Indiana Assembly as well as Washington Congress dealing with mine safety. The local legislation was looking to ban the use of open flame lamps, which, had it been enacted, would have prevented this disaster. The national legislation dealt with the requirement for additional rescue shafts to allow people to escape the aftermath of the. Neither one of these had passed by this point in time, and while they don't bear on this disaster directly, those are the types of legislation that was essential in increasing mine safety to the point where disasters of this type are fortunately extremely uncommon. Some reports from the rescue workers. We need more air, word from shaft workers. Airtight petitions were being erected to prevent air from short-circuiting into crosscuts in order that clean air might be forced into the rooms where the bodies are. 18 rooms have been searched in the entry, with 3 more to be reached. 2 of the 20 men are believed to be buried under roof falls and will have to be dug out. We need more air was the only positive statement by a state mine inspector. He said rescue squads with their gas masks may bring in more bodies in an hour, or it might take all day. They're down there working. The rescue workers are down there working in the dust and the gas, exposing themselves to efforts on their behalf. One of the things in this particular disaster they stressed was the violence of the explosion. Like a cyclone, it states in the Indianapolis Times, men in Tipple say tremendous wind came up shaft, holding us in air blast. The Tipple is the top of the mine, the shack at the top of the mine that houses the equipment. A tremendous wind came up the shaft. It blew dirt in our faces and took us off our feet. For a time we could not get up. We were held in the tipple by the force of the air. When the force of the blast subsided, the men called for help. They found the cage was not working, and Glenn Morgan, a carpenter, went down the 290-foot shaft on a ladder. 294 feet, 30 stories on a ladder. He was the first to reach the bottom. Then William Hartley, a blacksmith, was lowered on a rope. On a rope. He didn't rappel. Modern guys would be rappelling with all their mountain skills and stuff. No, lowered on a rope down into the bottom of a gas-filled shaft. They found the cage had been damaged when coal cars had been blown against it. By using a car wheel as a counterbalance, the shaft was repaired and rescue workers lowered into the gas-filled pit. Man, that's the kind of action they took 100 years ago. Heck, people would do today, but they were able to do it. They were able to do it in 1925. Newspapers often or always tried to bring home the story in a personal kind of way. From the Indianapolis Times. A specter of dread shadows lives of all miners' wives. This according to Miss Elizabeth Sheedy, widow of Charles Sheedy, miner, 36, whose body is still in the clutches of the wrecked city mine, with those of 34 others, is the reason why mine disaster victims are displaying such fortitude. Few have gone to the entrance of the mine today. We live our lives in constant fear, Mrs. Sheedy said. We kiss them goodbye and hope. I wonder if she actually said that, or that was what the writer said, because that's really quite good. The terrific blow at City Mine Friday left 2 scores of widows and nearly 100 fatherless. Long lines passed through morgues. In long lines, Sullivan passed by the biers of the dead Friday evening. They lay in long rows at the town's 2 mortuaries. Biers, there's a word that doesn't get used. B-I-E-R-S. It's a word that means the support. Basically, the table. You could also have folding legs and wheels that would support a coffin or a corpse. It was assumed, apparently, by using that word, that the casual reader would know what a beer is. And I think that's because people in 1925 were much more acquainted with death than we are, much more familiar with it. Wakes in the homes, children dying in infancy, things that don't happen a lot anymore. So, along with the fact that people 100 years ago, I believe, had far wider vocabularies than we do now, they would use a word like beers and people would know what it meant. Old women whose days have been spent in praying against such an accident as this for their husbands and sons. Young women, children, old men who have spent too much or as much as 50 years as coal diggers, and men who will go down into the mine again and again in the days that follow. Headline, are there enough coffins? Miners with coal dust on their faces, lamps still on their caps, who had never trembled in the face of death themselves now shook as they looked into the faces of their late buddies. Now the workers, the 50 dead, are going to be the hourly laborers of the mine, but even senior management were put into situations in this disaster that were life-threatening. It was just fate. That was the statement today of John M. Lowry, president of the city mine here, in which it is believed 51 men met their death Friday. Lowry, with Elmer Davidson and Marshall Shipman, were the nearest men to the scene of the fatal blast who escaped alive. They were good boys, all fine fellows. I thought of sitting down and chatting with them for a minute. Then I remembered that no one was at the mouth of the shaft. If I had stayed to chat, his voice broke and he lowered his eyes. So the president of the mine came within a very small distance of having been a casualty himself in this mine disaster. He goes on to say it was like a hurricane, as other individuals did with respect to the blast, but nobody could be saved. It turns out that all 51 trapped did in fact die. The newspapers of the day really went out of their way to personalize grief in a way I think that we wouldn't feel comfortable with today. You might put it on Facebook, your Facebook page. You might talk about it with friends over at the house. But to deal with death like this, well, I'll give you some examples. Illness saves life. Lacey Thomas escaped the fate of his father and brother Friday because he was ill. He did not go to work. His brother John is among the men entombed in the city mine. His father was killed in a mine blast at Oakland City, Indiana, several years ago. A wife and 2 children survived him. His last day. It was John Salmon's last day to work. He'd planned to leave today on a trip to the West. He was unmarried. His body was recovered. Luck fails. When Lucky Dowdy's luck broke it, escaping death by a hair scores of times, Dowdy grew into the moniker that was attached to him. He was married at 16. The widow walks the damp streets, refusing to believe her husband is dead. Scar recognized. Body of Mike Cusack was identified by his wife from a scar on his foot. The body was mangled so bad that other identification was impossible. Well, after a trip down this mine and through this disaster, I think we need a change of pace. So let's have a little break, and when we get back, we'll talk a little baseball. Well, we're talking baseball and Babe Ruth, the Bambino. Well, that's what the headline said. Bambino to inaugurate training season today. Babe Ruth was synonymous with baseball. He changed the game. What most people don't realize is that in the first 6 years of his career, he was the finest young pitcher in Major League Baseball. He was the era's Dwight Gooden or Roger Clemens. He then transformed into the greatest slugger the sport has ever known. He was so famous that just his movements became news, and that's what we have here. Omaha World Herald. In his own modest way, George Ruth will inaugurate the spring baseball training season Sunday afternoon when he swings his portly form aboard a train bound for Hot Springs, Arkansas. Now let's say portly. He was, by the day he was huge. He was 6'2", 230. Most guys in the Civil War weighed about 145 pounds. And weighed on average about 160 pounds. Even ball players at the time would weigh 170. A 180 was a big fellow. So when you weighed 230, you were gigantic. Today, I don't think we use the word portly unless someone was pushing 300 pounds, and Babe certainly wasn't doing that. But let's see what happened. They have accompanied by one newspaperman, the Babe will cut loose from the icebound fastness of New York and set sail for the land where golf, riding, and hot baths are the principal amusements. Yeah, their spring training back then was Hot Springs, Arkansas. That's as far south as they wanted to go. There were some teams training in Florida, but Florida at that time was not what it is now. So it wasn't as built up as it is today, and it was much more rural. Hot Spring, Arkansas was a big resort town and had the facilities necessary to host a team like the Yankees. Well, it concludes the first box score is still a matter of 4 or 5 weeks away, and the first robin is even more distant. But spring cannot be very far off when the babe starts southward. This little story here led me on a little bit of a search and a chase, and it points out why it's so much fun doing this. I was thinking back then, were the Yankees the defending champion? No, of course not. Washington had won in 1924, led by their fireballing right-hander Walter Johnson, who won 24 games that year. But what I found in reading about the 24 season was that they weren't the Washington Senators. The Washington baseball team came into the American League in 1901, and from 1901 to 1905 were the Senators. Then for some internal stupid reason, they become the Washington Nationals from 1905 to 1956. Then from 1956 to 1960, they're again the Senators. And then they move to Minnesota, and off they go. And another Senator team comes, and then the Washington Nationals come. But in that period, during what we're talking about here, they were the Washington Nationals. But I looked, nobody called them the Nationals. They were still, in common parlance, still the Washington Senators. Which led me to think, what about the musical Damn Yankees, which is set in 1954. That's the musical where a diehard fan, middle-aged diehard fan of the Senators sells his soul to the devil so that he can come back and be a superstar player and lead the team to the pen. I wanted to know, in the play, as it was performed on Broadway in 1954 and 55, did it use the Washington Senators or the Washington Nationals as the team name? And it turns out that it wasn't, of course, the Washington Senators. So that would normally be case closed. But I looked across from the review, the 1955 review, Damn Yankees, and the other side was the playbill for what was going on in town, in New York, in the middle of May 1955. And what I saw is actually quite astounding. If you go to New York now, I haven't been in a few years, but if you're going to New York over the last 10 or 15 years, you might get a musical based on a play, based on a musical, based on a movie. You might get a great work like You're in Town or Rent. But there's never more, in my humble non-theater going opinion, more than 2-3 shows worth seeing at any given time. I want to go through this playbill for you. This is what was playing in 1955. Almost all of these are first run with the original cast. So here's what you had your choices. Choice up. The Bad Seed, starring Nancy Kelly. You ever seen that movie? It's the creepiest thing ever. When I say movie, it was made into a movie 2 years later, starring Nancy Kelly, about the world's worst kid. It's kind of like Night of the Hunter, but even creepier. Then, if you wanted something lighter, you could go see The Boyfriend. Remember The Boyfriend movie, 1971, starring Twiggy? That's a musical set in the 20s, flappers and all that kind of stuff. But on Broadway, it starred Julie Andrews in her Broadway debut. So you go see Julie Andrews, a 20-year-old Julie Andrews, in The Boyfriend. Didn't want to do that? Go see a good comedy. Go see Bus Stop, starring Kim Stanley. Bus Stop, of course, would be made into the Marilyn Monroe movie the next year. But you can go see another musical. How about Cole Porter's Can-Can? That's playing in the Schubert Theater, apparently, here. Already, that would be more than you'd be expected to see on a typical week in New York. But that's just the beginning. Let's go down south and get all sweaty. Let's go watch Cat on a Hot Tin Roof with the original cast, Barbara Bel Geddes, Burl Ives, and Ben Gazzara in the Paul Newman part as Brick. Why wasn't Paul Newman playing in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? Because he was across the way, starring in the play The Desperate Hours. That would be made the next year into a movie starring Humphrey Bogart. But here on Broadway, you've got Carl Malden and Paul Newman together in a tremendous thriller, The Desperate Hours. You can go see Paul Muni, if I was a fugitive in a chain gang fame, in Inherit the Wind. But the other people in it were Ed Begley, senior, not junior, and a young Tony Randall. We're about halfway through, believe it or not. Also playing with Silk Stockings, starring Don Amici. The Cole Porter musical would be made the next year into a movie starring Fred Astaire. For a little bit of sophistication in an unusual alternative lifestyle kind of play, we've got Tea and Sympathy, starring the most unusual actor of the 20th century, Anthony Perkins. You've also got The Pajama Game. You remember the musical with Doris Day, the movie, but this is the original musical starring Eddie Foy. It's still playing on Broadway, as is The 7-Year Itch, with Eddie Bracken as the man with the itch. I'm not done yet. You can go see Tea House of the August Moon starring Eli Wallach, or Witness for the Prosecution. It's too much. There's literally too much. You'd have to come and stay for 3 weeks and go see a different play every night. It's spectacular. It's jaw-dropping, the quality of performances that are available in the middle of 1955. Now, we're going to shift gears, really shift gears. This is a story of really bad people being murdered by really worse people. There are no good people involved in this story, so let's work our way through it. It's worth knowing about. Let's take a deep breath and get going here. Here's the headline. This is the great headline. Missing men hacked to death in jungle, bodies fired in grave. They were hacked to death, then burned. The burned and hacked bodies of Bert G. Lovejoy, patrolman, and George Peters, former police chauffeur, yesterday were exhumed from a grave in the jungles of the East Bottoms. The jungles were bottomland adjacent to the Missouri River in Kansas City that basically were left in a wild state. There were, it's trees, scrub, marsh, just a mess, no roads, and it became sort of, you think of a hobo jungle, it's kind of like that, but no roads in or out. Today it's part of the park system, but back then it was just a place where really bad people did really bad things. It goes on, apparently inspired by a maniacal desire for revenge, the slayers of the men buried their victims in the hole from which Lovejoy and Peters had taken 67 5-gallon bottles of illicit whiskey Sunday night. So, the two police officers were in effect hijackers, hijacking illicit liquor from bootleggers. Well, what happened to them? Near the grave were found 2 5-gallon bottles that had contained kerosene. The bodies had been thrown into the hole, covered with kerosene cloth and boards, and fired. From the cuts on the bodies of the men and the crushed bones, it is believed they were tortured to death. Wow. That's pretty intense stuff here. Kansas City Times includes a nice hand-drawn map of the area. I hope is on your screen right now. Give some sense of what we're dealing with here. Headline in the Kansas City Journal on February 23rd read, 2 victims buried in hole from which they stole whiskey. Slayers inspired by maniacal desire for revenge tortured Peters and Lovejoy with crowbars. I don't know how they knew it was crowbars, but it could have been anything, but there you are. Pin murders on bootleggers, says the headline. Caption, Mrs. Lovejoy bowed by grief as near nervous collapse. Understandable. But they didn't have CSI back then, and they barely had fingerprints, and when you got 2 sets of bad people doing bad things, unless someone independently sees it, you're not going to have any witnesses. Certainly no witnesses that are going to come forward and risk their lives over these people. So, headline in the Kansas City Stars on February 23rd is, Jungle Death Trail Dims. 3 salient questions face the police today in their probe into the jungle killing of Bert Lovejoy, patrolman, and George Peters, ex-patrolman. The 2 bodies were found mutilated and burned yesterday in East Bottom's bootlegger cache, a cache which the murdered men are accused of plundering. The police are trying to find out who are the slayers, who operated the distillery near the cache, and to whom did the murdered men sell the smuggled liquor. Well, what they did was, what the police did is, what they often do is they arrested, they use arrest to put pressure on people. They arrested the wives of the victims and held them for as long as they could get away with, while subjecting them to intense pressure. But that didn't lead anywhere here. What did happen was that it began to look more and more like the police are heavily involved in bootlegging in the Kansas City district. The commissioner of police says, the hijacker is worse than the bootlegger. The police commissioners have heard reports of extortion by other patrolmen. We have no evidence yet, but we are conducting an investigation. And then he breaks it down to guilt basically, you know what, in tax law, it would be a jeopardy audit. If you claim $50,000 in income, but you got stuff that only a guy who made $1 million a year should have, it's termed a jeopardy audit. They sort of reverse it and make you prove that the stuff was gained legally and taxes paid appropriately. Now, the commissioner says, I've noticed since my appointment that there are too many high-powered policemen. I am suspicious when I see patrolmen riding in expensive motor cars and when I see expensive machines that are their property parked outside of police stations. The average policeman makes $140 a month. Meritorious service may increase this to $150. This is not enough to enable the man to keep a big car. It isn't in other walks of life, and if police are the exception, it must be because there are exceptional circumstances. So a cop can't even have a car in 1925? That's how little they're paid? They expect them not to be tempted by hundreds of thousands of dollars of liquor? It really seems like what the police need is a better union. They ain't making enough money. The commissioner concludes, I don't see how a man with a family can maintain a Ford on such a salary. Yet there are Buicks and Hupmobiles owned and driven by policemen and no questions have been asked. Well, they continue to search for the perpetrators, and all they do is they run into more police involvement. New booze ring. Investigation discloses more liquor grafting similar to Lovejoy Peters case. They arrest 3 policemen. Action taken on orders of Chief Shreve, who had the men held for questioning. 2 patrolmen and a police chauffeur of the Sheffield police station were arrested yesterday in connection with the theft of whiskey from bootleggers under circumstances similar to those that resulted in the revenge murders of patrolmen Lovejoy and Peters. The discovery of facts that tended to show the prisoner stole from bootleggers started an investigation of the department that will be wide in scope, William Shreve, chief of police, said. Commissioner Koch then revealed that many reports had reached the chief of police complaining that patrolmen were extorting money from bootleggers. An investigation has been underway for some time. So the only criminals that they're able to find are cops. And the ones doing the bootlegging and the murder, they are pretty much free to walk around. Now, the fact that nothing's happening on here after a couple of weeks results in the Kansas City Journal printing an editorial with the catchy headline, "Are we getting anywhere?" Quote, "For 2 weeks, crime in Kansas City has been writing a sensational chapter almost every facts have outdared fiction in their superlatives and improbabilities. In the twinkling of an eye, they transformed into truths. 2 weeks ago today, the search for 2 missing men led to a rude grave in the jungles of the East Bottoms where their bodies, mutilated, were found. A few days later, it was disclosed that a huge cache of liquor had been under police guard on East 15th Street. 3 policemen stole some of this. The remainder of the liquor disappeared from under the very eyes of the police guardsmen. It was taken away stealthily in motor trucks." So that's it. The only perps, or the perps that we got are the ones in blue with a badge on their chest. Doesn't seem all that noble. Now, the press continue to demand arrests. Punitive statutes lose their sting when no steps are taken for their real enforcement, and the majesty of law becomes a mockery when government rules of action are so in name only. Why, in the face of the vast mass of evidence unearthed by police and federal authorities during the last 2 weeks, no formal action has been taken, remains with the public an unanswered question of more than passing interest. Confidence in good faith would be more conspicuous if forceful steps for law enforcement were taken, and at once. I think they just want to arrest anybody. And in fact, it sort of becomes an investigation by usual suspects. Because here we go. Police push search for bog killers. Efforts to clear up jungle mystery are extended. "I am confident," declared the police chief. "We will find these men, and if we find them, we will convict them. And convictions of Italians for crimes in Kansas City is rare." Convictions for Italians? Well, if you read the whole story, what they're talking about is there's 4 or 5 guys that they think may have known something about this. They're immigrants to the United States. This goes back to the Middle Ages. If you go back and look at crime statistics from the 13th century, the vast majority of executions for theft and murder in Britain are generally involve what we would refer to as the other. People traveling through town, people who didn't have a local person who was able to vouch for their honesty. This is the same sort of thing brought forward into the 20th century. Recent immigrants, they may be involved in crime, they may not be. They're involved in some crime, but are they involved in this crime? It really is the usual suspects. We've got a crime, let's bring them all in. And that's exactly what they do. Well, of the men that were arrested, 3 suspects released. 3 of the men who had been held since Tuesday night for questioning in the jungle murder case were released. They were Charles Dandridge, Pete Ferrara, and Eugene Nigro. It's an Italian name. So, they brought in some Italians, they released some Italians. Let's see what continues to happen here. 5 in jungle charged. First-degree murder is the accusation in whiskey slang from July 16th, 1925. They arrest, what happens is they rearrest the individuals they had just released and charge 2 more. So they have 5 people in here under arrest, of 4 of whom are of Italian descent. They're held without bond, pressures applied, trying to get one of them to crack and turn against the others, but it doesn't work. At the end of the day, headline, Kansas City Times, state will drop charges. At a conference today, the police chiefs and commissioners from the Kansas City area met to discuss the dismissal of charges against the 5 men who were being held with connection to the jungle murder, and it was decided that those charges would in fact be dropped. They threw out the possibility that 2 of the men could be charged under federal statutes for some minor liquor violations. That, as far as I could see, didn't turn to anything either. So there we have it. Some terrible, heinous murders. And all we got out of that was the fact that the Kansas City Police Department was incredibly corrupt, and people were making hundreds of thousands of dollars off the sale of illicit liquor and getting themselves killed because they're messing around with gangsters. Well, that is that. After a tale of such intensity, let's slow down a little bit. It certainly was an intense matter. We're going to stay in the area of crime, but this one ends up a little more farcical, but it does mirror recent events in New York City. So here's what we have. Millionaire is shot by woman. 2 bullets fell Hupful. Sister of envoy jailed. Hupful is spelled Hupfel, and these are rich. Well, it will tell. He's a millionaire real estate operator and former brewer living at 238 East 38th Street. Google mapped it, look there. It's a beautiful 5-story townhouse. Was shot twice by a woman who overtook him late yesterday at 45th Street and Lexington Avenue. So, a successful business person is shot in the back by, we'll find out, a pretty strange person on the streets of New York City 100 years ago. Who would have thought? The police at once arrested Madame Kasera Spalakovic, 40, a sister of the former Serbian ambassador to France, who was seen a few feet away from Hupfel as he collapsed. The woman was taken to East 51st Street Station for questioning. She denied the shooting and became hysterical when detectives persisted in interrogating her. She denied owning the .25 caliber pistol found a few feet away from the shooting. Hupfel was taken to Bellevue Hospital where an immediate operation was performed. Later his condition improved and he was transferred to Lenox Hill Hospital where it said his wounds were not dangerous. Lucky guy. Gets shot twice in the head from behind and somehow is not, well, mortally injured, is not seriously injured. But what about this strange woman? The woman, who is also known as Madame Germanovich, was taken to Bellevue for identification. Hupfel was unable to identify her. He said the attack was from behind and he did not see his assailant. Police investigation revealed an amazing story of romantic and international political ramifications. Under questioning, Madame Spalakovic said she was formerly a sweetheart of Hupfel. Doesn't look too sweet. The names of Christopher Hupfel and Madame Spalakovic were first coupled in 1918 when she charged that Hupfel and 2 New York physicians, the Dr. Taylor and Dr. Green, had conspired to have her confined to a lunatic asylum. I guess that their efforts did not result in her confinement, which might have saved Mr. Hupfel a couple of holes. Anyways, Madame Spalakovic filed actions for damages totaling $750,000 against Hupfel and the physicians. That's $30 million or so. Oh, $25 million. Let's correct. Well, the case proceeds. Shot that hit Hupfel cuts into sorry tale. So they're getting into some of the background work on this woman. Let's see what she says. Mrs. Spanelovich, they spelled her name differently now. Toy of Fate? Right out of Hollywood. The stars which direct fate. So she believed never worked a stranger transformation in life or fortune than in the case of Mrs. Kasara Spanelovich, held without bail yesterday for shooting and seriously wounding Chris Hupfel, millionaire realtor. 10 years ago, she was a beautiful young woman surrounded by luxurious things and aristocratic friends. The war was on, and if the story is true, she was the center of an international intrigue, the purpose of which was to use her as a German spy abroad. Doesn't sound like somebody you'd want to rely on to. She's not acting like somebody you would want to rely on to go undercover in espionage against the Germans. But those who knew her then would have difficulty yesterday in recognizing the beauty they knew in the stout, shabbily dressed woman with heavy lines in her face who moved forward when her name was called in 4th District Court. Well, Mr. Hupfel was extremely lucky. Hupfel at the hospital yesterday announced that he will recover. His wife, who fainted when she heard that Mrs. Spanelovich had shot him Monday evening while he was standing in Lexington Avenue, was said to have called on him at the hospital yesterday. At least their marriage is okay. Why wouldn't you? Okay, so here we are on July 1st. So by February to July, we've got, well, this reminds me of our last one a little bit here, of Dorothy Ellingsworth in the last one. Sanity of assailant of Hupfel questioned. Really? A commission was appointed today to determine the mental condition of Kasera Spanelovich, sister of the Serbian minister to France, who shot Christopher Hupfel, son of Adolf Hupfel, millionaire brewer and real estate dealer, last February in a New York street. Madame Spanelovich has been in jail since the shooting under indictment for first-degree assault. Hupfel was shot twice in the face, but his wounds were not fatal. At her arraignment, prosecutors said she had threatened others and was a menace. Menace is a good word, isn't it? she does seem to be acting like a menace. She's very menacing. So what do you do with a person who acts like a menace? Woman who shot brewer sent to asylum. Adjudged insane by a commission, Mrs. Kosera Spanojlovic, 40, alleged Serbian countess, now she's a countess, who on February 9th shot and severely wounded Christopher Hupful, wealthy former brewer, was today committed to the state asylum at Mattawan. Now, I'm not sure whether the state asylum at Mattawan is a hospital for the criminally insane or just a lunatic asylum. I would hope it'd be a hospital for the criminally insane, like Arkham. It has a more ominous tone to it. Well, our last quasi-criminal thing that we're going to deal with today is something where, well, if he's not crazy, he's close. Headline: Rochester, New York Democrat. Wild Bill awarded additional sentence upon bigamy charge. Who the heck is Wild Bill? Well, it turns out it's Wild Bill Waitman. Well, another jail sentence has been meted to William Waitman, who inherited $750,000 from the estate of his grandfather, William Waitman, founder of the chemical firm of Powers, Waitman and Rosengarten Company. Well, it turns out, I did the research, it turns out these really were some swells. That particular chemical company was almost as big as Dow Chemical, and by today's standards, everybody involved with that thing was a billionaire, the equivalent of at least 20 million. And what did he do with this money? Waitman, who gained the sobriquet Wild Bill in the processes of alleged spending of $650,000 of his inheritance, so he went through 6/7 of it, was indicted for bigamy in marrying 17-year-old Lucy McGreddy of Endicott when he already has 2 wives living. He was arrested in Baltimore for speeding while driving with a Philadelphia girl who was about to make Mrs. Waitman number 4. According to police, Waitman has been arrested on many charges and once served a jail sentence for violating prohibition laws. And he was sentenced for 2 years. Okay, we'll put that back. And he received a 2-year jail sentence for this bigamy charge. Maybe he should have gone to the Mattawan asylum along with Ms. Spanojlovic. He certainly isn't acting very rationally. Well, let's bring this month's endeavor to a conclusion with a little bit of travel, specifically cruises. Now, most people think early 20th century cruise ships, we think of the Titanic, but the Titanic was basically an ocean liner. It's a ship designed to get as fast as possible from point A to point B, in as much luxury as possible as well. But it's not the kind of ship that goes, from one island in the Caribbean to the other at 2 miles an hour. It's not that kind of ship. But they do have those kind of ships in the 1920s, and they're operated by many of the same companies, such as, well, heck, you could go on a West Indies cruise on the White Star liner Megantic. 20,000-ton displacement. 20,000 tons is half of the battleship Missouri. Like, it's half of a World War II battleship. It's a big ship. And where does this ship plan to take you? Nassau, St. Thomas, Barbados, Curacao, Cartagena, Kingston, Jamaica, Santiago, Havana. And you can go for $250 and up. So $7,000 for a trip like that. More expensive than cruising of today, but you probably got more out of your trip than you do going on one of the Princess or Royal Caribbean ships today. Now, other cruise lines are operating. You've got Holland American Line. You can travel to England or France. It also says you can travel to Central Europe. How exactly you get to Prague in a 20,000-ton cruise liner, I have no idea, but maybe they're talking about going to Danzig or Estonia and Latvia. Cunard Line is offering Mediterranean cruises from $275 and up, and West Indies cruises from $250 and up. So, $5,000 to $7,000 on a cruise on a big Cunard liner. You could also go to Lapland in early March. That's got to be cold, early March up in Finland. They do offer, also, the Red Star line was offering a 46-day Mediterranean cruise. Now, you got to be hitting 20 different ports. For $750 and up, for $20,000 and up. Seems like, if not a bargain, it seems like something you might want to do. You want long-distance travel, you can fly. You can take the train out to Los Angeles and get on a Los Angeles steamship ship direct to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii go to Samoa and Australia. This cruise line even offers a round-the-world cruise at $1,200 or about $40,000. On the Oceanic, well, okay. If you don't want to get on a cruise, you can travel by train. Think Sun Lake at Hot. Take the train down to Florida, then they hook you up with the Florida East Coast Railway Company, part of the Flagler system, and tours are offered whereby you stay in the fine resorts from Palm Beach down to Miami. Some of the hotels are the Hotel Ormond in Ormond. If you Google that, you'll see it's quite the place. The Ponce de Leon and the Alcazar in St. Augustine. And they stressed that you'd be able to indulge yourself with swimming and golf and tennis and all those other kind of great things. People traveled the same way that we do today. It was more expensive to travel back then, but I imagine that the trips would have been very interesting. Much less packaged and much more Peter Lorre kind of things going on. In any event, that brings us to the conclusion of our monthly episode. I hope you've had a chance to look at some of the other episodes that we've put out there, including I hope you had the opportunity to check out some of our other offerings, including the shorter specific topic episodes. We work just as hard on those as we do on these, and we hope you're finding this channel entertaining. And we hope to see you back real soon for our next offering with the March. And, have a great time and keep reading the papers. Well, that was good.